Hello everybody from Lakeside Grain and Feed, and we're happy to have you all here. I introduce quickly whoever's here for Lakeside, and everybody else will be through the meeting introduced. We have Brian Hoven, our sales manager here from Petrolia location. We have Eric Johnson, the manager of Melbourne. Here we have Dave Curry, our salesperson from Forest. We have Anita Spears on, that is coming back soon from her maternity leave. And we have Ryan McLean and Dave Verger from Melbourne here too. And we have Derek Wilkins from Lakeside as well. Did I forget anybody? I forgot Nicole. Nicole is from Petrolia, and myself, Friedhelm Hoffmann. I'm from Forest, and I am in the precision ag and fertigation mostly. Anyway, so this is our big crew that is here on with you and that you can talk to at any time. And now let's get started the meeting. And Nicole, you are next.
All right, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping stuff. So this meeting is recorded. So if you don't want to be on camera, you can just hit the camera button and you won't be on camera for the recording. Also, please mute yourselves while the speakers are speaking, and then we'll allow questions to be asked at the end. And you can just either unmute yourself or put your question in the chat at the bottom. What else? I think that's it. Giveaway will be at the end, and we'll start off with our first speaker, which is Sean Brennaman. He works for Syngenta. He's our territory sales rep for Elgin, Lambton, Middlesex. I think that's it. I think I hit all of them. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Sean.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Can you hear me okay where you are there?
Yep.
Yeah, as Nicole said, I'm your local territory sales rep with Syngenta. I've been with the company for 15 years in various roles, but in the last 3 years, I've been the territory rep from London to Sarnia. My wife and I live in Alvinston, just north of Alvinston, in between Alvinston and Watford, and in the heart of Lambton County. And really, I appreciate Lakeside. I appreciate all of you for joining us today. My contact info is up there on the screen. Please reach out via phone, email, Twitter. If you're not already following me, it's always great to connect with people out through the countryside, and together we can learn and see what's going on. I always like to start any presentation with this slide, and this is our row crop portfolio. Quite a few products on there, hopefully some that you recognize. And I like to start with this just to thank all of you for supporting Syngenta. And if you've purchased any of these products up there, we really appreciate it and appreciate your business, and appreciate you allowing Syngenta to be a partner on your farm. Today's talk, though, is a little bit about managing for high-yield wheat. And any of you that were able to attend the Ontario Ag Conference this year, the old Southwest Ag Conference, and if you got a chance to listen to Eric Watson from New Zealand, he broke the world record for wheat last year at over 258 bushels per acre. So incredible yield potential out there. And when you listen to his presentation, his recipes for success equal this. You know, he's going across the field 5 times with a nitrogen application, spoon feeding nitrogen through the season. 5 fungicide applications. I think rarely did he go across the field without nitrogen, without adding a fungicide in that as well. Lots of insecticide applications. You know, there's different hoppers that they would deal with there in New Zealand, and then 2 PGRs. He also had a lot of metrics around what he was shooting for plants per meter squared, tillers per plant. At the end of the day, he was really trying to maximize the number of heads per meter. And then also, you know, definitely irrigation. Really, the purpose of this is just to show what, at the end of the day, what's potentially the availability as far as for pushing yield but then realistically, what can we do here? Because New Zealand is a little different than Ontario, but I mean, going across the field 15 times, 16 times through a season isn't realistic with what we're doing here. But realistically, what can we look at doing? So I always like to quote Peter Johnson, wheat guru out there, and really, Peter, this is from Peter, wheat yields over 150 bushels are very possible here with good management and increased nitrogen rates. So some of the factors that Peter would say we need to consider to really be able to push to maximize wheat yields. Let's look at the stuff that's already happened. So fall weed control. I like the fall weed control, start clean, end clean, but also because if we're putting the herbicide on in the spring, a lot of times we might be trying to do that in weather conditions that aren't conducive. When we start to get down to -2 overnight, and then you start to add stress to that plant, we've seen that before in previous years where you can see a little bit of phyto, you can see a little bit of issues. So if we can do that application in the fall when conditions are better, we reduce that stress on that crop in the spring. That's just an option there. Planting date, I mean, I would say probably 65% to 70% of the wheat through Lambton got planted in by the end of September. We had a real good harvest. The crop itself, as far as stand establishment, some of the best looking wheat I've ever seen in my life through Lambton County. So we've got the potential set up there. And then nitrogen applications, this is what we can do going forward. I'm going to focus today on these last two, fungicide applications and plant growth regulators, the opportunity there. When I say that New Zealand, 258 bushels per the acre, highest yielding wheat in the world, you know, we actually in Ontario have seen some pretty good yields as well. We're not too far off from the temperature compared to New Zealand. We basically have similar temperatures. They might be a little cooler through some parts, more temperate. But we look back at 2016, we broke the Ontario provincial yield average in 2016. And if you look at the Lambton, Middlesex, Elgin, the counties I cover, lots of green up there. We averaged 96 bushels. And I know personally growers that were getting 160 bushels in spots through the field that year. And this is another Peter Johnson quote, but there was a grower, and this is McBain's down outside of in Niagara County, in Niagara, 240 bushels per acre. They had the yield monitor hitting. And we have the radiation here, the solar radiation. We have the lakes to moderate the temperature. We have the potential there, but we need to manage this wheat crop. So when I look at a crop, I look at the areas that we can focus on. Crop establishment, hopefully you've got a good quality seed treatment like Vibrance Quattro on your seed. And hopefully it looks as good as a lot of the other crops going into the fall. But now let's look at the rest of the window, the pest management, the grain quality, and then the crop enhancement windows. So where does yield come from? I like to focus first on this flag leaf. Really, when we look at that flag leaf, 43% of the overall yield comes from that flag leaf. So that's definitely the most important leaf we need to focus on when talking about protecting that crop and disease management. The second leaf before the leaf before the flag leaf or penultimate leaf, still incredible, 23%. So between those two, 66% of the yield comes from the flag leaf and the leaf before the flag leaf. And then if we move past that, we look at the ear itself. So we look at that ear, 22% of the yield can come from protecting that ear, mostly from Fusarium, but then really it's just protecting that ear from diseases, 22% of the yield. And then in this early on category, we're looking at GS30. So this is the beginning of stem elongation, when that crop starts to stretch early on, up to GS32, which is the second node. Even there, 11% yield. So if we're talking about a 100 bushel crop, we could be losing several bushel to 11 bushel at that early end if we're not protecting against diseases. So the whole cycle is critical, but if we focus on some of the areas where the biggest yield improvements can happen, it's definitely the flag leaf and before the flag leaf, and then the ear itself. So what about that early window? When I'm talking about the T1 timing, that herbicide timing, GS30, up to basically flag leaf. There's a lot of products in the market. Hopefully Lakeside would talk to you a little bit about TrivaPro. What I like about TrivaPro, it covers all the major leaf diseases out there with 3 modes of action. And some of those modes, they overlap on the diseases we're really concerned about. And they also offer different properties. So there's the propiconazole in there, the quilt component, or sorry, this is tilt, propiconazole. It gives some curative activities. If the disease is set in, it'll actually take it out. We got the quadrus component of it, azoxystrobin, which is a group 11. It's more preventative. You get it on there, it gives you a little protection going forward. And then the group 7, they call it an SDHI chemistry. This one really gives us long-lasting protection. It lasts very long. And with this overlapping group, you can basically keep that crop clean until past the flag leaf, until the ear. We want to hit the ear, but especially if we see diseases like stripe rust. I know we've had some outbreaks in some particular varieties, but Solatinol, this group 7, is a specialist on stripe rust. So having a product like this in there really protects you up until later on in that plant cycle. So then what about moving forward to look at the ear disease control? And 22% of the disease can come from, or yield loss can come from not protecting that ear. The product we've got there, and a lot of you have probably tried it last year, but Miravis Ace. So just a quick refresher on Miravis Ace. There's 2 modes of action in Miravis Ace. It has a group 7 and a group 3. So with that combined, we've got some overlaps within diseases, but then it's the adaptogene, this group 7, that's really bringing forward the Fusarium control and suppression there. Application rates, 400 mils per acre, 0.4. And we always recommend putting a little bit of surfactant in there. And really it's because we're trying to get the best coverage we can on those ears. And just that little bit of Agro 90, a little bit of surfactant, really helps spread and stick and give the protection where it's needed. Results, this was last year's results, but over untreated, very visual in the field. And when we average all the results, 10 bushels is what we get versus untreated. Now we look at other products in the market because there's been other Fusarium head blight products for decades now, right? And if you've been spraying for head blight the last 15 years, you've been using other groups, group 3s. So the advantage of Miravis Ace being a group 7 is it brings a new mode of action. And with that, we're seeing whether or not it's a little bit of buildup over group 3s or just being a new mode, we are seeing advantages to having that new mode in there. So versus other products out there, we see a bit of a competitive advantage. And then similar Fusarium suppression versus what other products in the market. I think all the products do a really good job in Fusarium suppression when we're targeting that. The benefit I see when we look at Miravis Ace is all the products, we're trying to really hit that flowering window. We're looking at basically getting out there at that day 2, right, and flowering. But in a lot of cases, fields are not uniform. Fields are not equal. We might have some daughter tillers that are behind by a day or 2. And that's where I see the clear advantage for Miravis Ace. When we look at outside of that optimal flowering window, we still get very good suppression of Fusarium. Whereas other products in the market, they have to be put on right at the right timing to do the good job. If you're outside of that window with the variable fields or daughter tillers, you might not get the Fusarium suppression. So Miravis is definitely an excellent Fusarium product. And last year, growers saw the difference in yield. When we look at, this is mostly off of Twitter, I pulled some of these off here, but several bushels in a lot of cases. Some of you might even see your own name up here as we go through, but really good results. When I average, so actually I'll come back. No, we'll start with this. When I average out all the yield trials through my territory last year, we were pretty dry through grain fill. So the grain fill period through Lambton mostly was cut short in a lot of cases. We had 11 days of 30+ degree weather. When I average out all my results, about a third of them didn't see a yield benefit over other products in the market. A third of them we were within 2 to 5 bushels, and a third of them we were 5 to several bushels ahead of other competitive products. So in most cases, that Fusarium put at heading, or the Miravis Ace put at heading, there wasn't a lot of Fusarium last year. So in some cases, between the dry weather and the lack of Fusarium, we didn't see that several bushel yield advantage in every case. But in about 2/3 of the trials, we did see a really good competitive advantage. But overall, even if you didn't see a yield advantage, you saw the quality difference that Miravisace provided. I had calls from growers weeks after saying they could still see in the field the line where Miravisace was applied. And with that, cleaner combines, just cleaner quality. I had several growers who used straw in the barns or were selling straw. Again, they said that even if there wasn't a yield advantage, they would buy Miravisace again the next year because of the quality, less dust in the barn, just better overall health and cleaner combines. One of the things that I think we can take advantage of when we look at all of the, we call them MERN trials, but economic rate of return of nitrogen. If I usually tend to question growers about what their nitrogen rates are, sales reps, and say, what's the average nitrogen rate? There's a lot of 120 to 130 pounds of nitrogen out there. A lot of that is that you're going for the yield potential goal. In some cases, it might be because you're on ground that you know might lodge, so you want to avoid the lodging. But in most of Peter's trials, if we're closer to that 150 pounds of N per acre, we're more close to that economical return. So how do we balance putting more nitrogen on, still being able to harvest the crop and avoid the lodging? But when we're using fungicides, it's important to maximize your nitrogen because that's where the real benefit from the fungicides come from, is being able to utilize that nitrogen more effectively. Back to the recipe for success that Eric had in New Zealand, he applied 2 PGRs. So we'll talk a little bit about some PGRs. The newest one on the market is our product called Modus. So Modus has been around for decades now. We just have brought it to Canada this year. And worldwide, it is the #1 plant growth regulator in the world. When we're talking about application, we're looking at that early part of the window. So it does line up well with an early fungicide application. So you can get both the plant growth regulator benefits and some of that early yield benefit as well. And hopefully with a product like a PGR, we're protecting the yield early, but it's really more about maximizing the overall harvestability of that field when we're talking about plant growth regulators, trying to get as much of that crop off as we can. You know, at the end of the day, plant growth regulators, I look at it to say, where's the biggest bang back for the dollar spent? And to me, it's about expected yield. There's several things we can look at, but what's your expected yield potential? If you're over 100 bushels, a plant growth regulator might be for you. What variety are you growing? Is there a larger chance for lodging to happen? Then a plant growth regulator might be for you. Planting date. If we've planted in that September window, we basically have the maximum yield potential available. With how the wheat looked in the fall, I mean, a lot of great tillering going on. We probably maximized fall tillers, and fall tillers typically yield more than spring tillers. So we're set up for a high both yield potential and an ROI. And then nitrogen management, if you're doing 2 applications, if you've got manure, or if you're using bio pellets, those sort of things, what's your nitrogen application? Those are all things I consider for a plant growth regulator. And this picture really highlights it. When we look at, this is from a couple years ago, where we applied a plant growth regulator and then they didn't. This is about harvesting the potential in the field. The amount of loss we see over down this bottom quarter is incredible. And the more we can get into the combine, the better off we're gonna be. Not only that, it's the frustration, how much time it takes to harvest down here versus up here. Fuel costs, secondary benefits. What is Modus? The active ingredient is called trinaxapac ethyl. It's available to apply on wheat, barley, and oats. We have submitted for winter barley. It's not there yet, but we expect it for next year. It's a 2x10 case. The rate for winter wheat is in that a case will do 48 acres. So it's 0.4 liters to the acre. A case will treat 48 acres, 24 acres per jug. Timing is pretty important. On the label, it says the window is 30 to 39, which is basically the start of stem elongation, when we start to see those first nodes at the base of the plant, up until when till basically flag leaf. But to be optimal, we want to be in that 30 to 32. So let's take a quick look at that, why we want to be in that 30 to 32, which is that stem elongation up to the second node. Here's what it looks like on the plant. You can see up here, this is the beginning of stem elongation. This second picture, we can see that first node, and then GS32, 1 node, 2 nodes. So this is the window to maximize the plant growth regulator application we want to be in. The reason why is plant growth regulators work where you apply them. So if we're applying at that early stage, we're getting that strengthening of the base of the plant, which is really where we want it. Even though the window for the applicator goes up to 39, as we apply later outside of that window, that strengthening will just be a little higher. And really there's some benefits there too, but to maximize the best response, if we get that strengthening at the base of the plant, that's where we're going to see the best benefit. And then think of it like a fishing pole here that, would you rather, from a stability or stability perspective, would you rather have the strength down here or the strength up at the top of the fishing pole? So what's it look like when it's applied on the field? On the top plant here, this is without a plant growth regulator, and there's the first node versus where Modus was applied. So you see that the nodes are shorter there. The second node's shorter. It doesn't last a very long period of time, but it does affect the plant growth at the period you applied on. So there you see the shortening of the nodes, and then the nodes after the third node, fourth, they're all actually similar length, the later nodes, but it's those early nodes that we're trying to shorten and strengthen and have that stability aspect. So not every acre, I would say that not every acre should get a plant growth regulator. I think it's really for those fields that we can help manage and push the high yield potential. In some cases, if you're at that 120, 130 pounds event, there's a potential to maybe add an extra 20 to 30 pounds, use a plant growth regulator and be able to maximize that wheat crop. In all cases, we don't always see a shortening. I get that question a lot. What about if I'm selling the straw? Am I getting less straw? At the end of the day, you might be getting less bales, but the weight from the field will be the same because we're shortening, thickening that lower base of the plant. So there's a little more weight there, but not in every case where you see a shorter plant. Depends a little bit on the variety. In some cases, you might see a little bit of shortening. In some cases, you might not. But in some cases, too, you might see a thickening of that base like this picture here. But in some cases, depending on the variety, you might not see that as well. Some other things to consider about a plant growth regulator. We do not want to apply a plant growth regulator when that crop's under stress, just like we would with a herbicide or a fungicide. If we get down into those sub-zero temperatures, we want to give that crop a little bit of time to recover before applying anything. You can mix a PGR with a fungicide, with a herbicide if you want, but it's really more about making sure that the nighttime temperatures are not stressing that plant, that crop. And again, anything that's under stress, you won't see the benefit from there. So under good growing conditions, that's when the best time to apply the plant growth regulator would be. When we look at all the results in winter wheat with just the plant growth regulator, we're averaging about 6 bushels per the acre. Now, in and itself, a plant growth regulator really shouldn't be increasing yield. It is more about maximizing your nitrogen, getting more grain through the combine, and being able to get every kernel you can off that field. That's the benefits of a plant growth regulator at the end of the day. The local trials from last year, so this is just south of Forest, the picture on the left here, and there we saw approximately a 9 bushel advantage in a plant growth regulator, but not every variety. So the Blaze, we saw over a 9 bushel advantage here. In the Branson, you can see it was still pretty lodged. The lodging between the treated and untreated with no plant growth regulator, it was approximately 80% lodged. With the plant growth regulator, it was still 35 to 40% lodged. So there wasn't really a yield benefit here. Back to variety selection, back to being able to understand what am I trying to maximize here from a nitrogen potential. Just because you use a plant growth regulator doesn't mean you won't see any lodging. You still can see lodging, but it's still about trying to maximize the overall potential. Then another field outside of Mount Bridges here, you can see the Modus treated down through here. And even they had a couple of 3-inch rains. I think there was 3-inch rains during grain fill through to harvest, and even still some lodging in some of those areas. But there was a 14 bushel difference between the untreated and the plant growth regulator treated. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Please reach out on, like I said, give me a message, email, Twitter, but please send me a message if you have any further follow-up questions about plant growth regulators and maximizing your wheat yield.
It looks like there's a question in the chat, Sean. I don't know if you answered this yet, but does a PGI reduce the straw volume or just a stronger stem?
Yeah, great question. So we actually did some work with some growers last year who were taking straw off, and their comments were they got less bales per acre, but the weight, when they weighed it out, there was more weight on the plant growth regulator side. So it comes back to, I think if you're selling straw, you probably want to sell by weight, because there is a chance, depending on the variety, it really depends, that shortening depends on the variety and how it responds to a plant growth regulator. In some cases, you might not see much shortening. In some cases, we can see 3 to 4 inches of shortening, depending on the variety. But I think at the end, it's the weight should be the same or better, but you might get less bales per acre. The key with, if you want straw with a plant growth regulator, remember that shortening and strengthening is at the base of the plant. So you want to make sure you're shaving the ground and cutting as low as you can. If you're cutting very high, then all that thickening and strengthening is below where you've cut. You're missing out on the weight opportunity there. Great question.
All right, if anyone else has questions, just unmute yourself, but if not, I think we'll move on to Albert. Take it away, Friedhelm. You're muted, Friedhelm.
There we go, unmute myself. Questions and discussions are always welcome, so don't hesitate or don't be afraid to ask. We are now going to Albert, and Albert is our provincial field crop pathologist with the OMAFRA, and I don't think we need to more introduce him. If I did forget something, Albert, you can.
No, you're good.
I think everybody knows you. You're so active. Anyways, we appreciate a lot that you are signed up with us. Thank you so much. Okay, Albert, to you.
Thank you, Friedhelm, and Nicole for the invitation, and that hopefully you can hear me and you can see my slides.
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. So, yeah, we know many of you, and I wish we were in person here. This is one of the difficult aspects of doing this virtual and that. But we talked about a number of different diseases in the area that's affecting you, as well as some of the ones that are problematic or potentially could come into the province. And you've heard of me talk about tar spot. You've heard of this on Twitter, what's going on in the US and in Michigan. And tar spot is here now, and we did find it in the southwestern Ontario, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So one of the questions we get asked a lot right now is, okay, it's here, what does that mean for us? And if you go back to this past summer, it was September 21st when we got a call from Jonathan Brinkman, one of the corn technicians with David Hooker at Ridgetown campus, that had some unusual plant symptoms that were going on in one of the cover crop corn trials, long-term rotation trials there. And went out there and we saw this, this flecking, these black spots on the leaves and that, and at first he had thought it was some other stuff, and when we looked at it, turned out to be tar spot. That was our first confirmation of tar spot in Ontario, in Canada, on that 21st of this past year, and we quickly went to Guelph and took him to the diagnostic lab, and we were able to identify it and confirm that, and then with the US and our colleagues in the US able to genetically confirm that it is indeed tar spot of corn. This is some fields, this is from a field around not far from where I live in the Rodney, West Elgin area. This field here, this was early October that we went into. You can see a considerable amount of tar spot on those leaves. There were 2 different hybrids in this field, also a fungicide application that was applied at the tassel silking application, so that VTR1 application. And that's one of the questions we get a lot of, and what's some of the research we're looking at with our colleagues in the US is that fungicide timing, because often with tar spot, it comes in later, you know, that R3, R4 application. Do you apply a fungicide for leaf disease control or jib or ear mold? Do you have enough residual there? You know, Sean talked about some of the products and that activity and that length of that residual activity. That's an important, especially for some of these diseases that could come in later. It's an easy disease to identify. You know, it looks like tar spots. It looks like what you might see on, you know, your maple trees around the house, ornamentals, and that you have these what we call stromas, basically the overwintering structure, or the area, the structure, fruiting bodies that produce the ascospores that are released and then infect the plant or survive till next year. One thing to do is they're like pepper spots or so, and easily if you rub on them, they're very much like sandpaper. They don't rub off like sand or insect frass and all that. So this is your typical symptoms you may see. You may also see, you know, this one in terms of gray leaf spot or some other lesions on there, or corn diseases, but tar spot's pretty easy to identify. This is one version you may see. We also saw the second symptom that we see for tar spot, and that is what we call this fisheye, or what you get are these tan halos around that stroma or that black fruiting body. So you can see 2 different types when it comes to tar spot, both those tar spot-like lesions on the leaves themselves. They're pretty well independent or individual. Then you can also have, as I said, that fisheye appearance. You can hold that up to the sunlight and use the backlighting to really pronounce that border or tan border around those black lesions. And you can also find it on other plant parts such as the husk and that as well. So I've mentioned that tar spot's been on the radar for us since 2015, when it was first identified in Illinois, Indiana area. And since then, it's continued to spread both north, east, and west and south into other parts of the US. And over the past 3 years, been approaching Ontario and right up to the Ontario-Michigan border. Michigan has been quite, had considerable problems since 2018, 2019, and 2020. So a matter of time until we would find it in Ontario. Again, this is those stroma, those black tar spots produce the ascospores. Those spores move by air. And so storm fronts, prevailing winds, and those from the Great Lakes states, and particularly Michigan, moving into southwestern Ontario, will move those spores in, and not unusual that we would have seen infection. As I said, September 21st in the Chatham at Ridgetown campus. Since then, we found it detected in Essex, Lambton, Middlesex, and Elgin County as well. So the areas that we had expected to see it in the Southwest, it was detected for this year as well. So one thing to keep in mind, why did we see it later on this year? That's very typical of the pattern that we've been seeing for most years in the US, is environment plays a critical role in the development of tar spot. Think of this past summer. We were hot and dry for a lot of it, particularly down here. It was those rains that came in right around pollination time for corn, right? That helped us out in terms of getting those yields and that for save the crop in many cases, and that. So those conditions that also helped in terms of cooler temperatures, better moisture, cooler, humid evenings, long wet periods, leaf wetness periods, all of those high relative humidity are all really conducive or favorable for tar spot development, particularly what's going on at night with those lower temperatures and that extended leaf wetness period. It does overwinter on corn residues, so that's one of the questions we get asked about. But again, and I'll mention this later, for us, the amount that we had in the Southwest and in the area here, I don't see the overwintering potential as a great threat going into next year. It's still going to come from what's going on in Michigan, the US, right? Those spores coming over and hence the importance of this real-time detection system that we have in place here can help us anticipate movement and expectations in terms of tar spot movement. One thing to keep in mind is, as I mentioned, these cool, wet conditions that favor tar spot development. If you get that earlier on in the season, that really increases the potential risk or the impact in terms of yield and plant health for tar spot. So 2018 was a great example in the US where those cooler, wet conditions started off in, basically June, July, and throughout the summer. And in areas throughout from Michigan all the way over to Iowa and Wisconsin, 50 to 60 bushel losses to tar spot was not unusual. And that was the turning point, 2018. It went from 2015, 16, and 17 to be, yeah, it's here, but it's not really causing much impact until the right environmental conditions hit in 2018 that we saw those significant yield losses. And that elevated the interest in tar spot and that. As I said, we are able to track the disease daily throughout the US and into Ontario as well. This is just a snapshot of what was going on in August 12th. We started seeing an increase in confirmed these yellow counties that have been flagged here in the US, and Michigan in particular, are areas that tar spot was detected and on the rise there. So we started seeing that inoculum potential, those spore potential to move into Ontario started to increase. And that also started to tie into when we were starting to see more favorable environmental conditions for the disease. This is some data from a colleague of mine out of Indiana, Darcy Talenko, and just showing the progression of the disease in 2019, which is very similar to what we would have saw this past year. As Sean mentioned, the importance of the flag leaf and the top 2 or 3 leaves in wheat. We have a similar situation in corn, where we look at the ear leaf and then we look at the 2 leaves above or below that, because that drives a lot of the sink, that drives a lot of the filling of the ear. And we could see in 2019, the disease, the detection was in mid-July. It took a while to start to increase, but as we started getting into cooler temperatures, wetter, more favorable conditions, then tar spots started to explode in these fields on those ear leaf and those related ones close to that. And that's very typical, that often you'll start seeing it, and then we saw that this year where it's in the later reproductive stages, so R3 to R5, so from up to dent to grain fill, soft dough, all those in that area. So that is important. But in 2018, as I said, there was a lot more of those favorable conditions that occurred much earlier in the season. And this is similar progression of the disease in Michigan. And we could see that early August, and then those environmental conditions that were quite favorable in 2018, the disease was able to quickly wrap up. Very similar to what maybe you see with, say, the rust diseases. And stripe rust and wheat is a good example that Sean mentioned too, right? That can explode within a few weeks. And we could see that progression quite quickly on the ear leaf and a couple of leaves above that in corn happening in 2018 in Michigan. The result was, just aerial shots here, looking at late August, where you can start seeing areas of the field that are starting to senesce, starting to die off due to tar spot. And then quickly, as the spores and infection continues to progress in that field, you could see that, 2 to 3 weeks later, we have that field senescing quite early. And the earlier the senescence, of course, that's going to have an impact on grain fill, as well as ultimately on yield as well. So this is the year, this was the turning point in 2018 where we thought of it as more of a curiosity to a point of, this has adapted to our Great Lakes state, Great Lake region environmental conditions, and need to look at it. And so we have a corn disease working group and tar spot working group that we're all working together in and looking at areas from evaluating hybrids to fungicides, fungicide timings, residue management, etc. So we've got a number of projects on the go here. But the question that we get asked is, so what does this mean for us in 2021? First off, okay, so we know it's here. It's important to be out there scouting. The earlier we detect it, the earlier we can start to manage it as well. So if you're in Essex, Chatham, Kent, Lambton, Elgin, Middlesex, those lower 5 counties, there is the potential of it surviving and overwintering in those fields on the corn residue that's in those fields. Although saying that, the risk in 2021 will be low as an inoculum source. It's still going to be a lot of what is going to drive the disease, and our risk in 2021 in Ontario is what's going to happen in the US. And hence, as I said, we have that tar spot monitoring program that's there that can help us. We're also working with our colleagues in Michigan and Wisconsin at looking at a tar spotter smartphone app as well, and we're in the process of doing that. Questions we often get, also have had from growers is, well, should I be targeting hybrids that have some tar spot resistance in that? First of all, we don't have a good handle on those. Companies don't have a good handle on them as well. So should we be avoiding highly susceptible hybrids? If it is possible, sure. But remember, we have other diseases, other issues there that you should be focusing on. So things like northern leaf blight, gray leaf spots, gibberella, those ones I'd prefer you to concentrate when you're selecting hybrids to focus in on those diseases and that we know you have a risk of every year. The other question, of course, is rotation. Should we start rotating to other crops? As I said, it's airborne. So, moving moving away from corn and going to soybean, especially with the prices and that, it won't really help you because it's air dispersed, so it'll have limited effectiveness there, right? Where it may have an impact is if you've been on corn, higher risk, that with the field history, that could be a potential way to minimize your risk. But again, for this upcoming year, it's those spores and what's going to happen in the US. Is there a question in here from Ryan? Is there potential for spores to overwinter for multiple years? As of right now, we see it more than likely. It's that follow-up year is the key one, where the spore longevity is, and the risk is in that follow-up year, because that residue and those stroma on top of the soil will shoot off those spores, right? So the following year it will basically use up its spore supply in that case. So the risks for a follow-up year, a second year, would be very low. Our growers there in no-till situation where corn residue is present for several years. Yeah, so again, I think those spores will be shot that follow year. So the risk is in that second year, that first year after corn in that regards. Also, identification. We had so many pictures this year because everybody was out in the field, and I had all kinds of pictures like this coming in. And basically, this was insect frass, it's aphids, it can be pollen, it could be other, dirt, etc. on there. Grab your hands, spit on them, wet them, just rub away, and this other stuff will disappear. If it's tar spot, it's going to stay on there. It's going to feel like sandpaper and that. And so it's an easy disease to identify. It's just a matter of getting out there. This year we saw a lot of, especially with the aphids, we saw a lot of sooty mold types, that black mold on the corn, and that as well, that could be confused with tar spot. But again, most of these, all of these will just rub off on there. And back to Ryan's question in terms of the residue and that, so you have that overwintering residue and it's surviving. It's those spores that are released that next year, particularly again, if you've got really good weather conditions that will start that infection process. And then that's where that cycle goes back. So remember in 2019 with that late infection, the cycle was limited, right? Maybe 2 or 3 repeats of that cycle. In 2018, though, where you had a longer and earlier infection period, that resulted in more of those cycles going. So you have a snowballing effect when it comes to the diseases or the amount of spores and inoculum being produced. And we can see symptoms usually within 2 weeks after that, and then it will dry down, return in the field. And again, as I said, that the risk will be in the following year there. So on the residue management side, sure, it may be help in some ways in terms of reducing some of that residue, but it's not going to be very effective, and that because of the air dispersal of those spores, so limited effectiveness. Those weather conditions, as I said, will move those spores or that inoculum from the US. Fungicides are an area that, since we don't have a lot of or don't know what we've got on terms of the genetic side of things, fungicides have been shown to be very effective, and a lot of research that we've been part of, and our US colleagues in the Corn Disease Working Group are there. Timing is important. We've been looking at that tassel to R2, that full silk, a window that we often will see with other diseases, and it's showing that in most years, other than 2018 when we had came in early, that timing or that window of application that normally we would be using can be effective in terms of reducing tar spots. So we have that, and as Sean mentioned, we're seeing more and more products that have those mixed modes of actions, right? So you're bringing in, whether it's the new SDHIs or those in there. So having those 2 to 3 way products with different actives have been very beneficial, not only from a tar spot standpoint, but for other corn diseases and that. And, important also because the disease develops within a few weeks, that you want to have these applications as close to the onset of the disease or the risk, depending on environmental conditions and what we're seeing there. But regardless, tar spot's important. Tar spot is something that I want you to keep on the radar, but don't forget, we've got northern corn leaf blight. We saw what happened in 2018 with Jib or Dawn, gray leaf spot. All of those are diseases that we have and diseases that can cause you losses every year. If you think of tar spot and how it will set up, is that 2018, we had the Gibberella Dawn situation, white mold, those type of years when you see that risk for those diseases, those are the same type of environmental conditions that we would consider high risk for tar spot as well. And, back to Ryan's question in terms of tillage, and that this is some work out of Illinois, Nathan had done, and we saw that he saw that there was a reduction of about 16% reduction in tar spot severity by removing that residue. And the greatest reduction, though, was with fungicide application. In this particular case, using TrivaPro was the product here. But as we talk and move on, TrivaPro and other products work quite effectively against tar spot. And one of the good things is that many of the products that we have and are using and registered are very effective against tar spot as well. timing is an important piece, just as the wheat story, in corn as well. This is some of our collaborative work with our US colleagues, again, looking at fungicide timing. I only pulled out the tassel application or R1 application at this point. And as Sean mentioned, that return on investment of fungicides are important, right? And what we've seen and what we've noticed over the past, 4 or 5 years is that our return on investment is moving up than where we used to be. As we're starting to see better timing, better application of these products, better products as well with these multiple modes of action, we're starting to see an increase in terms of our return on investment now. And so, in those, depending on what your costs are, but if you're in the, the mid 20s cost of program applications or so, now we're starting to approach that 50% to 60% return on investment. Earlier, I didn't show our earlier V6, V8 applications. Those are considerably lower. So that timing application that we're seeing at Tassel R1 that can help us with both our foliar leaf diseases or our jib dawn risks are also very applicable for our tar spot applications as well. And so, this is just an image from Purdue, looking at non-treated, the difference in how quickly we can see the disease progressing. And we see the same thing, and I'll show you some of my northern corn leaf blight data this year as well. So, the concern here is how rapid the disease can go. But as I said, we have a number of products available in Ontario that are very effective against tar spot as well. And so some of the this is looking at my northern corn leaf blight inoculated trials at Ridgetown. This is on a susceptible corn hybrid, a number of different products. This is part of our US group. So a few of these are US products that have been added in here, as well as an experimental that we have. So, the Miravis, the adaptogenic side that Sean had mentioned is included in here. We've got our untreated inoculated checks in here. Veltima is a new product from BSF that has been submitted for registration in Canada as well. They work very well this year in our northern corn leaf blight trials. You can see we had a difference of basically 50 bushels over time. And so many of these products, particularly these mixed modes of action, these ones that incorporate, say, 3 different fungicide classes, are starting to creep up there and starting to get consistent control. This is, remember, we really push these trials with our inoculation, and we had considerable amount of disease, and we saw that in terms of our impact on yield. This is an aerial image of those trials, and we've just selected some of the treatments on here. I picked up, I'm going to show you the experimental. Our untreated control will be in blue, and then our Veltima in green here. And you can see that our untreated checks here, these were untreated, non-inoculated ones here. And you can see even though they weren't inoculated, the movement of northern corn leaf blight throughout this plot was considerable, that it basically resulted in full infection and substantial early senescence of those plants in there. If we look at this new experimental, we could see that we had that stay green, very little northern corn leaf blight in this trial. And then with the Veltima here, again, similar to what we saw with the experimental, these were all at the Tassel R1 application. With tar spot, we've been looking at that R3 application because of the disease coming in late. It can work depending on the product, but unfortunately what you will see is there is a decrease in efficacy with the R3, right? Now, remember, in this particular trial, we did hammer them with high levels of northern corn leaf blight. So we can see a reduction, but again, that later application may be beneficial and a possibility if we need to on very susceptible, high disease pressure fields. If you utilize a resistant variety, and you should be considering that in your decision process, look at the difference in terms of what we see. Those same products are, come up to the top, whether you're looking at the Lero, which would be Stratego Pro, the Miravis Neo, Veltima, that experimental, the Headline Amps, Triba Pros, those are all still up there. All of these products worked very effectively with that resistant hybrid, right? Because the disease loss potential is greatly reduced. So we do have a lot of very effective products out there that can help us in terms of our diseases that we have presently, as well as can help us on the tar spot side. And this is just looking at my 2019 trials that we had. And I just want to point out that the big difference that we had from the inoculated versus uninoculated ones here. We have, again, over 60 bushels or more lost to that disease. So take it, it's considerable. There's great potential for yield loss in these. But again, we have a lot of good products up there that are very effective against tar spot, but also will be effective against the diseases we have present. So it's here. It will overwinter. It will continue to spread. My concern will be also if it starts moving into Eastern Ontario and Quebec, those conditions, those environmental conditions out there, it may even be worse, higher risk there than what we would see in Southern Ontario. As I said before, very similar to what we would expect with white mold, Fusarium head blight, northern corn leaf blight, gibberella and dawn. Be aware of tar spot, but please don't fear the disease. Next year, scout your fields, monitor the movement of it. Look at our alerts, our tweets, etc., as well as the mapping and the monitoring we have out there through the IPM pipe. We have other tools through the Crop Protection Network is one that we work a lot with our U.S. colleagues, and there's a lot of corn, soybeans, and wheat information there, both on diseases. We're going to be adding insects and weeds as well in there. Field Crop News, you can contact me directly. As I said, we are in the development of a tar spot app, as well as the white mold app, Starbuster and Sporecaster there as well. And Field Crop Protection Guide has a lot of these products in there, and the and rates, etc., as well as Sean and others and the people at Lakeside in that to assist you in selecting your fungicide choices. And again, as I said, a lot of us are part of this tar spot working group, and they're bugging me about my leaf shirt on, putting it on. And of course I have to do this because this might be the one year I get to cheer them on into the playoffs past the first round. So if you have, great, thank you so much for the opportunity. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, or just send me a note or so as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but maybe somebody else has opened up their mic and wants to ask something.
So the one question, my question, Caitlin asked the question, so why do I think that maybe Eastern Ontario and Quebec might be more of a concern than Southwestern Ontario? If you think of white mold risks and things like that, so Eastern Ontario, Quebec being cooler and potentially more wet conditions in that than say Southwestern Ontario, where we tend to be hot and dry in many cases, right? We'll have those hot, dry periods through, say, mid-June, late June through July, right? And that could delay that initial infection. Whereas, say, the Eastern Ontario and Quebec, where they have more of a more temperate, more cooler, more humidity, but more leaf wetness at night. And so one thing, when we talk a lot about moisture and that when it comes to diseases, and we often think of rainfall. Rainfall is good, especially if you got phytophthora and that because of saturated soil. But actually, leaf wetness, humidity, those dews are much better at these foliar leaf diseases developing because that leaf wetness stays that much longer on there. Think of diseases, on corn and that, where you have the leaf bent. Often you'll see those lesions on that bending portion of the leaf. That's where the moisture stays the longest, the leaf is wet the longest.
Very well. Anyone else? I guess you overwhelmed us with so much good information.
It's all good. You guys have a great day.
Thank you so much, Albert. Thank you so much. You can keep asking and contact Albert directly or us, and we can make sure you get the right answer. All right, so now we are going in a quick coffee break because it is, and our next speaker is our very own Dave Curry. And Dave Curry is a little bit more than a year with Lakeside, and he contributes quite a bit to our knowledge center that we are known for, and the agronomy side. And of course, he will tell us what's going on this year, as we have a lot of wheat around us here, especially in Lambton County. How we can, the big bushel wheat, how we get that. Dave, this is your time.
All right, give me a second here. Just trying to get it loaded. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can see it, and we can hear you, yeah.
All right, yeah, so good morning, guys. The name's Dave Curry. Just trying to get it's not wanting to do the presenting mode. There we go. Yeah, so I work out of the forest office at Lakeside, and I kind of cover off, I guess, the greater forest area. So that's all the way from the shores of Lake Huron all the way down to the Thames River in the south and everywhere in between. And yeah, thanks for logging in to, I guess, watch this webinar today. And I hope you guys take away some tips that will potentially improve your cropping practice. So I chose to speak about winter wheat for my talk. And wheat has always been one of my favorite crops to work with. And I find it's one that really responds well to proper agronomy and farmer management. And also this year, with the fact that we've got a pretty solid futures price on wheat at $7.60 a bushel right now into the elevator, it's giving them even more of a reason to push the wheat yields this year and try to maximize economic returns. So the systems approach to growing big bushel winter wheat. So the word system is often thrown around, and it really fits with wheat production. Wheat is a crop that responds to the correct management, and there really is no single silver bullet. It's about a high yield management system. And this system encompasses early planting, seed genetics, looking at seed treatment, fertility programs, so starter, P and K, nitrogen, sulfur, and micronutrients, and looking at crop protection products, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and growth regulators. Here we go. Yeah, so early planting winter wheat in 2021. So obviously the wheat's in the ground now, but in general, one of the greatest drivers in wheat yield is getting the wheat planted early. And this picture here I took from the Omafra field crops team. And it really just identifies kind of the optimal planting date for winter wheat in our region. And for the Lakeside trading territory, we're in that September 26th to about October 5th. And past that point, we lose about 1.1 bushels per acre per day when we get past the optimal planting time. So it's really important to get wheat in the ground early. Early planted wheat will generally out yield later planted wheat. And that's because we do get some more tillers and heads per square foot. I'm targeting in general about 1.5 million seeds per acre on the lighter, more productive soil types, and about 1.8 million on heavier clays. And when we get past that optimal planting date, we're looking at about 200,000 more seeds per acre per week to overcome the lack of fall tillering. Because, in the spring, we'd like to be out there walking the field and looking at plants that we're digging up with multiple tillers and big yield potential. So I think it's important to get out harvesting early, and if we can get the combines in the field end of September or the first week in October, we're going to maximize our wheat yields. So I think it's key to pick an early maturity soybean as your wheat bean. So maybe looking at potentially a full maturity group earlier to make sure you're getting the combines in the field early. So in our trading territory, I would say in that 1.2 to 1.5 relative maturity group is probably the most ideal wheat bean, whereas, the 2.2 to 2.5 is a full season bean. So planting the best genetics. With the wheat crop, we have a fair amount of new and exciting genetics coming to market. We are starting to see some of the new varieties pull ahead in the cereal performance trials. And these newer varieties are showing superior agronomic traits, whether it's disease resistance or improved standability under high management. And I think farmers should be trying new varieties when a solid one comes available. I just wanted to highlight here our seed brand C&M seeds, and they've been a key player in the wheat breeding program over the last decade or two. And just as an example here, I snapped this picture from the Ontario wheat performance trials for area 1, which is covering off our neck of the woods. And one of my new favorite varieties, C&M Blaze, topped the trials in 2020 with 113 yield index. And when you compare it to a Pioneer, say 25R40, which is a common one in the marketplace, it was almost 10 yield index points higher. So there is some big yield potential in these new varieties. So seed treatment, with wheat, sometimes we're planting into not so ideal conditions in the fall that are potentially at higher risk for soil-borne diseases like Fusarium or Pythium or Rhizoctonia. And I think fungicide seed treatments, they've proven themselves and big time economic response in the trials, and especially on later planted wheat. These treatments generally give a slight edge on seedling vigor, and they help with fall stand establishment and making sure we're getting the crop through the winter. The seed treatment market, it has evolved slightly over the last few years. Vibrance Quattro is now kind of the industry standard, and it's a mix of 4 fungicides, and it really covers off a broad spectrum of disease. Insecticides, I wouldn't say we always recommend them on every acre. However, there are some soil types that are prone to insect pressure, and they'll generally show a nice yield improvement. And these would be, your lighter soils or farms that have some gravel in them, a history of manure applications, or potentially a fair amount of cover crops in the rotation. All right, so on to fertility. So we've got the best genetics in the ground, it's planted early, we've got the correct seed treatment down, and now it's time to dial in the fertility program. And fertility by far is the biggest influencer and driver in big wheat yields. Just a bit of a plug for Lakeside. Since I've come on board Lakeside, I've been very, very impressed with our company's fertilizer capabilities and expertise. I think we have one of the most state-of-the-art fertilizer plants. We have a great high-capacity blender, and we stock pretty much every product under the sun. So, no matter what the soil tests, we've got the fertilizer fit for you guys. And just here's a picture of our large fleet of custom application equipment, and we think we can get the job done on time, spread with accuracy and efficiently. So I just wanted to emphasize here on this slide, I built a bit of a chart here showing kind of the nutrient removal for 2 different yield plateaus of wheat. So the 100 bushel club and that 140 bushel realm. And on the left-hand side here, we've got nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, sulfur, and manganese. And I think those are kind of the main nutrients that are driving yield. And I just wanted to emphasize, as you're moving from 100 bushel wheat to 140 bushel wheat, it is going to demand quite a bit more fertility. So that's something we've definitely got to look into. So I highlighted here phosphate and potassium, and both of these nutrients are required in large amounts by the crop. The plant will pull out about 90 pounds of phosphate out of the ground and just over 200 pounds of potassium out of the soil. So it's important not to always bank on soil reserves for P and K, and sometimes we do need to lean on a starter fertility application to really get that wheat crop up and going. For starter P and K fertility, wheat responds extremely well to phosphorus starter applications. And in Ontario, we have seen on average about an 8 to 10% yield boost with a seed placed phosphorus.
Hey, Dave,
I think you just muted yourself.
Is that better?
Okay, you're good now.
That's better.
Jeez. Okay, are we still on with, you got the screen there? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Sorry
all
about that.
good.
I was clicking away, I guess. Yeah, so just this was emphasizing here a seed placed phosphorus product on both sides of the row here, where they put nothing in furrow and on a lower testing soil type. Sometimes we will see on phosphorus deficient soils when it turns cool in the fall or early in the spring, we'll see the wheat turning a little bit purple because phosphorus is not as available. So it's very important to keep your soil test topped up or look at a starter phosphorus product. So back to the nutrient removal table. And I've highlighted nitrogen and sulfur here. And at the end of the day, these are the two main nutrients that really drive wheat yields. In general, nitrogen is doing the majority of the heavy lifting, but it definitely requires a fair amount of sulfur to hit those top end yields. I just put here this 8-to-1 ratio. So for every pound of, or 8 pounds of nitrogen pulled out of the soil, the wheat crop will need about a pound of sulfur. So really feeding high rates of nitrogen, you definitely require sulfur in the mix. And as you see here at 140 bushel wheat, it's taking almost 34 pounds of sulfur out of the soil. So we know that nitrogen and sulfur are probably the main drivers in yield. And in general, we've seen the economic rates of both nitrogen and sulfur increase over the last decade. I'm now feeling very comfortable recommending 150 pounds and even up to 165 pounds of nitrogen to kind of hit that maximum economic yield return. And that would be backed up by Ontario research as well. And to get those big yields and make use of that nitrogen, we need roughly 20 to 25 pounds of sulfur. It's very important to get out there early in the spring to right at green up, and it's going to hopefully help promote a little bit of tillering, which would be very important on later planted wheat. Usually that timing is going to be somewhere early April or late March. And on a year like this, where we're starting to get some warmer weather, we might be out here in about a month spreading fertilizer. I just snapped these two pictures over the past few years. This was just an example here on the bottom of an early application of nitrogen on the right side of the screen, whereas we had some snow drifts in the field, so we couldn't actually get in to the outside perimeter of the field. And you can see right to the line 2 weeks later, quite a bit healthier, greener, darker, better looking wheat. And on the top of the screen here, this was just a sulfur plot I did a few years back, where we had a 0 sulfur rate versus about 15 pounds. Much healthier and greener looking. So if we're going to be putting on these really high rates of fertility, we must look at a split application. And that's really not only going to help us reduce our risk of environmental loss or going into the creeks and rivers, but it's also going to help reduce the risk of lodging, because not all of that nitrogen is going to go into making big vegetative plants. So we're going to look at an early spring application at green up at about 30 to 50% of the total nitrogen. So that's going to be somewhere in the late tillering stage before stem elongation starts. And then we'll come back in with the remainder at the second node stage, at growth stage 32, when you can start feeling 2 bumps on the stem. And we'll put on whatever kind of remainder we feel. I just wanted to highlight here that probably most of the sulfur should be put on in the early shot. And that's because when soils are cooler in the spring, the organic matter, it will not mineralize or release as much sulfur. So we tend to see more sulfur deficiencies early in the growing season. So I'm kind of targeting about 3/4 of my sulfur recommendation in the early shot and about 1/4 in the second one. So we've got the, I guess we've got the fertilizer rates dialed down, and it's important to think about how you're going to apply it. And with wheat, accuracy and uniformity is key. And I think no matter what, you've got to use either an airflow or a streamer on a sprayer to apply nitrogen on wheat. You should never use a spinner unit. Year in and year out, I've seen wheat fields that have streaking issues. And this is just an example here of a pole type spreader that's gone through the field, and you can see dark green strips where it's quite yellow or lighter green in between. So obviously quite an issue with uniformity. And that's really going to lead to some challenges at heading, because you're going to have delayed heading in the really nitrogen rich areas. So timing that Fusarium head blight spray is going to be a bit of an issue. So in general, I don't want to see streaking anywhere but at the stadium. Okay, I just wanted to dive into sulfur a bit more. So sulfur, the 4th macronutrient, and sulfur is quickly becoming a staple nutrient required across multiple crops. And high yielding winter wheat is really no different. 140 bushel wheat will pull about 34 pounds out of the ground. We do get some sulfur from the organic matter and previous crop residue breakdown. So somewhere in that 10 pounds a year roughly from the ground. And that's why we're targeting on the high end, maybe 25 pounds of sulfur. Just wanted to take, just show some of the common products that we're using. If we're blending dry products, we would utilize ammonium sulfate, which can go in with urea and be airflowed on. For liquid products, which is a very common one, ammonium thiosulfate that can be tank mixed with UAN and streamed on. And if the soil test calls for some other nutrients, we do have K-Mag, Emerald, Mez, Sulfur 90, or even sulfate of potash. Even though we've been pushing sulfur for years, sulfur deficiency is still very, very common in my travels in the countryside. I even snapped this picture actually last summer. We'll tend to see pale and stunted plants. The new growth will have a bit of a yellow tinge to it because sulfur is not very mobile in the plant, so it doesn't move from the old tissue to the new tissue. And it's often very patchy through the field, and it'll show up on the lower organic matter soils or the eroded clays first. This is kind of a neat picture I stole off Twitter that a farmer had taken with an aerial shot of his sulfur plot. So he left, it looks like 4 passes with the sprayer without sulfur, and quite a striking difference between, you know, the good areas and then the sulfur deficient zone. But I would even say if you look at the lower runs in the field, you can almost tell that even the good areas probably could have used a higher shot of sulfur. And from the comments in his post, he put about 10 pounds actual down. So back to this nutrient removal chart, and I wanted to highlight one micronutrient that seems to becoming more and more of a challenge for us in wheat production and corn, soybeans as well, and that is manganese. And the thing that I just wanted to highlight too is, you know, when you look at the 140 bushel realm, the crop is pulling almost a full pound actual out of the soil. That's quite a bit compared to, you know, the older realm where we're maybe getting away with what the soil could provide. Manganese, it's a crucial micronutrient. It's required by all crops, but it's especially responsive in wheat. And year in and year out, I see all kinds of manganese deficiency in various crops. Tends to show up more often on the lower CEC kind of sandier soils or the really high organic matter soils because of tie-up. But it will show up on normal productive ground because manganese, it's extremely reactive in the soil. And when soils dry and are full of air, manganese is oxidized from an available form from this Mn2+ to an insoluble unavailable form. However, though, if we do get rains and the soil re-wets, manganese is reduced back to an available form for the crop. I took this photo probably 9 years ago, somewhere in Oxford County when I worked up there. And it's kind of neat because sometimes you'll see the tire tracks in a field actually showing up greener and more attractive looking and healthier. And that's because those compacted zones, the manganese stayed more available because there was less oxygen. So driving by this field, if you hadn't seen these tire tracks, you would never have known it was manganese deficient. And we went in and put a foliar product on, and within a week, it was dark green. Manganese, it's most available in the slightly lower pH range, as you can see by this chart. And when we get into a little bit higher pH soils, which is a lot of the soil tests that we see at Lakeside, manganese availability starts to decline a little bit. And I just wanted to also make a note here. You can often see issues of manganese the year after a lime application, because as we put on lime, we'll get a huge spiking in pH, and it can drive sometimes a manganese deficiency. So maybe that's not an issue as much with wheat, because guys aren't tending to lime before wheat, but it's something to highlight for your corn and soybeans or vegetable crops. Yeah, so manganese, it's a key micronutrient involved in the photosynthetic process. And it's found here in photosystem 2. So this is inside the chloroplast. In the thylakoid membrane, this is the electron transport chain. And these little guys here, they take in light and convert it to energy. But what they also do is they split a water and create an oxygen and hydrogen. And that's done by manganese. And if you don't have manganese in the plant, essentially you get an issue with light and oxygen breaking apart, or I guess, sorry, water breaking apart. And you get a whole downstream dysfunction of this whole apparatus. So the big thing is if we have manganese, the plant's nice and healthy. Sometimes we can run into under high manganese deficiency. There's almost a burning of the leaf tissue because essentially all that light energy can't go anywhere and it starts to destroy the cells. Manganese, it's something that shows up more and more on high organic matter soils or high pH soils. It's common during periods of drought. And similar to sulfur, it's immobile in plant tissue. And these symptoms will show up in the younger, newer growth. We get a little bit of an interveinal chlorosis. And long-term, there's a decrease in the photosynthetic productivity of the plant and an overall reduced growth rate. Luckily, though, we've got many options on the market to correct manganese deficiency in wheat. We always lean towards a foliar application because of soil tie-up, and it's hard to get manganese into the root if you're broadcasting, let's say. I think it's important to be somewhat proactive with manganese and not wait till you see visual symptoms. If you know a field has a history of manganese deficiency, it might be worth going out and doing a tissue sample, and that $30 tissue sample might go a long way. So away from fertility, and I guess we've done all our good to kind of get the crop growing and off to the races, and we need to protect it and make sure we're taking out weeds, we're going after disease in the crop, and if we have bugs, we're going to take them out. And under the high management scenario, we might utilize a growth regulator. Weed control. So winter wheat, it's one of the best spots to address tougher weeds. And I would say to farmers, don't miss the opportunity to control weeds in the wheat crop. Typically, we get a solid chance to go after some of our tougher weeds, like some of the winter annuals like Canada fleabane, or perennials like dandelion or chickweed, or some of these wild carrot issues that we're seeing. I wanted to make a note too that post-harvest control is key. So after the wheat comes off, whether you're out there mowing your red clover, planting a cover crop, or doing a burn down in the summer, or some sort of primary tillage, the biggest thing is do not let weeds go to seed. And especially this scary one, water hemp. This weed is starting to move across Lambton County. we now have a fairly large pocket in the Petrolia area and a decent sized growing pocket west of Thetford. Luckily though, wheat is extremely competitive, and the majority of the herbicides that are registered in wheat are pretty good at controlling water hemp. But you know, there's always issues with wet holes, right? And this was just a picture I took last summer in a field near Petrolia, where there was quite a bit of water hemp growing in the wet holes. And then, you know, walking some of these fields later in the summer after the wheat was harvested, there was water hemp going to seed, and that cannot happen. We have many great options for herbicides. I'm not going to dive into too many of them. These are probably my 3 favorites. Definitely not an option if you're growing clover in the wheat, because they will all take it out. The big thing though is always spray your wheat. Wheat is probably, the herbicides in wheat are probably the cheapest cost per mode of action. So you know what, a $12 to $15 herbicide in wheat would have cost you $30 in corn. And I just think here, make sure you consult with your agronomist on product rates, water volumes, and safe tank mixes, and then also potentially temperature issues. You don't want to spray this stuff when it's near a frost. Yeah, so fungicide and disease management. Genetics in wheat is still probably the greatest factor in a starting platform for disease management. And I think farmers need to select a really highly resistant variety first. This is just kind of a neat picture here showing a 2-pass fungicide program versus a no fungicide program. And it's interesting, in the no fungicide, there are some varieties that were completely obliterated by disease, whereas you've got some that are still green as grass. So obviously the genetics are number one, but we do like to lean on fungicides a little bit. Some of the newer diseases we're starting to see, like stripe rust, have made it a bit more challenging for producers. And there's more and more acres now being sprayed with a fungicide above and beyond the T3 or that heading timing. Just one of the, I know Sean already talked about it, but one of the really good ones that has come to market is Miravis Ace. Some good third-party data. This is a fairly old trial out of Ridgetown with Jonathan Brinkman and Dr. Dave Hooker. And they did a multi-year project where they compared fungicide by nitrogen interaction. And the thing really to highlight here is, as you move from a lower nitrogen rate of 90 pounds up to that 150 mark, there is a much greater response to a fungicide. And not just the typical T3 heading one, but when you layer multiple passes in here, you're getting a huge yield boost of almost 18 bushels. And part of that is some of the newer diseases we're seeing. One that comes to mind that's been a bit of an issue is stripe rust. It was a relatively new pathogen, at least from my experience. I first walked a field that had stripe rust in 2016. And it was kind of a unique disease because it spread very, very rapidly through the field, even under fairly hot and dry conditions. The spores are wind-blown, and they'll move from field to field, and within a week or two, they've blown through an entire field. Stripe rust, it can cause a huge economic impact to the wheat, and there's been reports of 40+ bushel per acre losses, because essentially once that plant is covered in stripe rust, that photosynthetic engine is completely knocked out, and it's just going to senesce early, and you're going to have tiny little grain in the head. Just a couple pictures here that were neat. This one, I forget where I stole this one from, but it's an example of an older genetic variant that's not very resistant to stripe rust and quite susceptible, side by side with a newer variety of winter wheat that was highly resistant. And you know, you can definitely see the stripe rust in that canopy versus there's not much in that one. But we do rely on fungicides, and fungicides do work. And Rob Miller had posted this, our BASF guy, just a farmer that left a check strip in his wheat field when he sprayed early with something like, I believe they used Headline Amp in that situation. But a Trivapro or a Miravis would work perfect. Obviously the disease we're always worried about, Fusarium head blight. Most farmers know about Fusarium by now. It's a huge quality concern for wheat. It's very much environmental dependent. We need lots of moisture around pollination to get that infection into the head. And again, we're relying on genetics and fungicides, and we think we're keeping ahead of Fusarium for the most part. The optimal timing, most farmers know this now, I would say, but we need to paint that head, and the head needs to be extended up from the flag leaf with the flowers starting, so kind of half of the flowers on the plant going. Yeah, so insecticides, they do fall under the crop protection banner. Most years, we're not recommending an insecticide because we don't have insect pressure. However, there are armyworms rearing their ugly heads every few years. We had a few fields last year even that we had to spray for armyworms, and it can be a significant yield robber if left unchecked. So it's all about good integrated pest management and getting us out there to scout and making sure that we're not going out and wasting our customers' dollars on a fun insecticide if it's not warranted. Sean talked about this in his presentation, but I really think in this high yield management scenario, growth regulators are becoming a big part of the final part of the puzzle. We currently have a couple growth regulators on the market, Manipulator and Modus. And these can be applied around that growth stage 32, so we can tank mix them with a herbicide or with a fungicide. And as Sean said, it's going to help with standability, right, and make that lower part of the plant a little bit thicker and a little bit stronger. And we're only going to target this on fields that it's a high management scenario, and somewhere where we're potentially going to see lodging, or farmers that have used a fair amount of manure in the rotation. So just to wrap up, guys, growing high yielding, profitable winter wheat is not about a single silver bullet. It's a management system, and it encompasses everything, right? It's not just about growing the right variety. It's not about putting extra urea on. And I would say, you guys, we have still a lot of time to dial in our fertility plans and our crop protection plans. And, over the next few weeks, maybe take some time to chat with one of your Lakeside staff and plan the strategy for how you're going to hit those big yields this year. Yeah, and I guess that's wrapping it up. Good luck with the 2021 wheat crop. That's my contact information there, guys.
That's perfect, Dave. Thank you so much for that. Lots to think about it and to work with. Any direct questions to Dave?
Yeah, Dan Campbell asked, there was a picture of sulfur test. Do you know what the yield difference was, Dave?
There's been some tremendous sulfur responses. I know I've weighed off 8 to 10 bushels on average, but I have heard on certain soil types where this one, I think here they had a significant one. It was like a 20 bushel. It all depends on the soil type. In kind of southern Lambton County, though, I would think we're going to get around an 8 to 10. And as you push nitrogen rates, you've got to increase your sulfur rate as well, because there is a point where you're just wasting money on nitrogen if you don't have enough sulfur. So it's been a proven economic response, if that helps.
Perfect. There's another question. Is there any benefit to applying P and or K in the spring?
Yeah, so good question. In general, phosphorus, we see more of a response ahead of planting, just giving it the chance to get into that root zone. So I would say if your soil test is very low, then yes, there is definitely a response. But if you're farming on a 20 ppm, maybe it's best to put it on after the wheat crop comes off. Now with potassium, there's typically not a huge response to a spring applied potassium product like potash. However, though, there is some research showing that the chloride in urate gives a little bit of a disease benefit and helps the plant overcome some diseases. So we probably get on average 2 bushels, but wheat is not as responsive to spring applied potassium, if that helps.
There's another question from Brad Langstaff, 150 to 165 pounds of N, 20 to 25 pounds of sulfur, 2 applications. What is your economic return? How often are you seeing an economic return? Difficult question.
Yeah, exactly, right. I think that, well, the ministry's work, anything of the third party work from, whether it's Peter Johnson and his group or Dave Hooker, they have kind of targeted that 150 as being the MERN, right? That maximum economic rate of nitrogen. And that was research done 5 or 10 years ago even. So I think we're easily seeing a return there. And I know there's customers on the call here that went up to 165 this past year, and on their yield monitor, they did get a nice little boost, and it all penciled out. So it really depends on the market price too, right? So when you're talking $7 to $8 wheat, you can throw an extra $5 or $10 of nitrogen on and gain that 4 or 5 bushels and really pay for it. I think the 150 mark, that has proven itself, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed research that's showing 150 is almost the starting where we need to be.
So, but he asked also 2 applications.
Oh, on the 2 applications, yes. And so really the 2 application idea is to mitigate the risk of lodging and loss of N. So if not every year are you going to see the 2 applications pay, but say even last year it definitely paid, and I think there's lots of evidence around the countryside where guys went on early and put everything on, and they didn't hit the same yields as the split application farmers. My thing is, if you're going to go above 120 pounds of nitrogen, you have to split apply it, because the risk of lodging is just a little too great. And what if you get a massive rain event after you apply all that nitrogen, and the field stays saturated and you get all kinds of denitrification or potentially runoff or leaching? So there's some other environmental risk there, or you might just lose nitrogen and then it's gone.
You mentioned, Dave, before, I think, when it comes to the 150 or 165 or whatever the rate is, it is important to see how the wheat comes out of the winter, right? Would you not say so?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of where we can tailor our plan. Like, I think we're going to have a standard approach early on, but maybe that second shot, if it looks really good and the potential's there for some big bushels, that's when maybe we'll throw that extra 10 or 15 pounds on. But coming out of the winter, I would say sometimes the race is to get on the really late planted wheat that's small and maybe only has 1 tiller or no tillers. And if you're out there early, there is the chance that you kind of promote tillering and hopefully put another head out. So yeah, identifying and scouting those fields in March and making sure you can really target which ones need that big boost to get them going.
The next question is, you mentioned wild carrots and dandelion control in wheat. Is there a product that controls those 2 better than others?
Yeah. Where are we here? So for dandelions, I think we've got these 3 products do a pretty good job on dandelions. I think I tend to lean towards Infinity FX because it's bringing 3 unique modes of action, and you're getting a group 27 in the mix, which is nice. They're all going to be very good on dandelions. For wild carrot though, sometimes you need to have a group 2 in the mix. So this Barricade M, it's got a blend of 3 chemicals, but there is a group 2 in there. The Refine SG is in there, and it's got fairly good activity on wild carrot. There's also a product called Peak, which is registered on wheat. That's probably the best for wild carrot. So if wild carrot is your issue, then Peak would be the one I'd lean towards.
Okay, and the next one is from Clark. Should we be using a N stabilizer?
Yeah. It was a long talk. I took some things out that I was going to talk about, but something like Agritane or one of the generics that's on the market, they do have a nice fit. So those urease inhibitor products, they target the enzyme that breaks urea down. And essentially, if you surface apply any urea-based product, whether it's dry urea or UAN, which is half urea, there is going to be a benefit there if we don't get a nice gentle rain event to incorporate that into the soil solution. So I would say the N stabilizer, it's not a benefit on every acre. It's definitely a forecast dependent product. So if you look at your 7-day forecast and there is 0 rain events on the 7-day forecast, then I think you're really going to get a payback on an N stabilizer. But if within 2 days you're going to get a 10 millimeter rain, you're wasting your money almost. So I think it's worth having, and the trial work has been done, and some years it's a huge payback and some years it's a break even.
Good. I hope that answers. Any other questions? That's not, then thank you so much, Dave. And Dave is still available all the time at Lakeside. So you can reach him or any of us out there, Melbourne and Petrolia or here. Anyways, we are moving on, and Nicole.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty, so next up we have Winfield and Cropland's Caitlin Miller. She's going to speak about wind packs. And then we have Darren McCollum after, and he's going to touch on adjuvants.
All right, can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, off to a good start. So hi guys, like Nicole said, I'm Caitlin Miller. I'm a market development agronomist covering Southwestern Ontario. So feel free to follow me on Twitter. We do a lot of fun stuff on there. But today I'm just going to take you through a quick but exciting presentation on our Cropland soybean wind packs. Okay, so just to start off, what is a wind pack? Basically what this picture shows. So it's 2 different soybean varieties based off complementary agronomics with the same maturity mixed into one bag for you guys to be able to grow in the field. So why do this? No soybean is perfect on all soil types. So Winfield United has done the research to select an offensive and a defensive bean to be able to co-pack in that 50-50 blend. So what we've done is the offensive bean is really high in yield, will do really well in those low fertility spots, maybe has really good soybean white mold rating. And then we pair that with a defensive bean that has the same maturity, same dry down, that will do good on those sandy knolls in the field, or sometimes it has really good standability. So I know a lot of times with those big heavy beans, sometimes lodging can be a problem, but it's really cool in these wind packs that sometimes the defensive bean can hold up the offensive. So why do this? You can see that picture in the bottom right corner there. Every field has variability, and it's a nice risk mitigation tool to be able to co-pack them together, so you can maintain yield on those sandy knolls and then gain it on those fertility spots as well. So this is just an example here. So this is our Cropland 18 wind pack. So for those of you who like CHUs better than the maturity zone, it's 3025 for CHU. And you'll see here, so our offensive bean is that 1818. It's #1 for yield. It's got the Pythium root rot tolerance and genetics. This one has really good standability in this case. And then we have the defensive bean, the 1719, and so it's been paired up. So that one in this case has really good soybean white mold, has the SDS genetics, and really good emergence. So every hybrid and variety has an Achilles. So that's kind of why we've done these wind packs, is that we can make the perfect soybean variety. And we actually sell the offensive bean on its own, and then we co-pack the 18. So the only one that's not commercially available is the defensive bean on its own. So again, why do this? This is an awesome risk mitigation tool. Lots of times we see these pictures in the field, these wet spots where the soybean dies out, or you get white mold or SDS problems. If you have 2 soybean varieties in there and one that can handle those wet conditions, you're going to have a more consistent field and gain more yield over the length of the field. And there is a yield advantage. So we've done the research. We tested the two components separately on a field scale and together, and you actually get a 2.2 yield advantage just by blending the seed together. Cropland doesn't charge more for wind packs. We eat those costs. It can be a logistical nightmare getting the same seed size, getting the same, pairing up the same maturities. But there, we have seen the yield advantage, which is why we've gone ahead and done this. And we're not the only ones. So 65% of the Cropland soybeans sold in the US are sold in a wind pack. And that's 2017 data, so honestly, it could be higher now. So I kind of call it like a cheap step towards precision ag. You got the complementary agronomics, you have the risk mitigation, and you're getting the yield. So I'm calling it a win-win-win. And just so you guys know which ones we have out there on the market, so we have two commercially available, our 18 wind packs, so 1.8 maturity. And then we have an earlier one that's probably too early for you guys on this call, but an 07 bean as well. So you'll find these in our seed guide, but feel free to jot down those numbers. And actually, I'm gonna go back one. And just so you know, we did launch these 2 years ago and we've sold out for 2 years in a row. So the wind pack idea is catching on and it's working, which is great. And since it is catching on, we actually have 4 coming to the market, which is awesome. So these are gonna be in trials. We have our 0521, so in 0.5 bean, and that's actually a picture of them I took up in Ripley this summer. So a really nice uniform bean. We have a 1220, so a 1.2 maturity bean, and these are our 2 new Extend wind packs. And that one has a really good white mold rating on it. And then on the bottom here, we have 2 new Enlist options. So Enlist is kind of nice if you want to switch up your modes of action, a different chemistry spray. And these 1620s, the offensive bean did awesome in our third-party trials. Like it had, we have some plots that it went 83 bushels in Centralia. So I am pumped that we co-packed this 1620 bean. And then we have a 1921 as well. So just a little bit later for you guys. So those will be in plots, so stay tuned for more on those. So my talk is quick and sweet. So just a summary of why choose a wind pack. No soybean is perfect for all sources of stress in the field. That could be insects, that could be field variability. The blend of complementary agronomics is a risk mitigation tool, like we showed you those pictures. And there's a yield advantage. So we're not charging more for these wind packs, and you guys are able to capture that yield. So that is all I had for you guys. My contact info was there. Feel free to reach out and I can answer any questions that you have.
Alrighty, Darren.
All right. I think I got the right one here. Awesome. So they saved the best for last. My name is Darren McComb. I'm the agronomy lead for the Eastern Canada for Winfield United. I'm just about going on into my 4th year with Winfield, and it's been quite a ride talking about adjuvants especially, and we also talk a lot about the Cropland brand. But today we're going to do a quick broad overview of adjuvants. They sometimes get a bit of a bad rap sometimes. You hear about these stories that adding some of these adjuvants don't work or don't do the job. But I'm going to just try to give you a broad overview, why use certain adjuvants over other adjuvants, and just kind of get it in your brain a little bit about what they can do. So there is kind of 2 different classes of adjuvants. We have the, see if I can find it. We have the activator adjuvants. Those are generally on label, right? Those are on an adjuvant that is required on the label for that pesticide, whether it be a surfactant or an oil. They're generally recommended for that product to help do the thing to get that pesticide into the plant. Surfactants are our most common, right? Wetter, Sprigger, Sticker. At the Winfield brand, we have High Activate, and we also have oils, generally used for leaf surfaces, penetration, journey, and destination. And that other class is the utility modifier. Generally not on label, but they can do certain things to kind of fine tune that spray application. I like to think as adjuvants, we're just going to tighten things up a little bit, whether it be drift and deposition to get a better job of coming out of the sprayer nozzle, or a water conditioner to kind of make sure the quality of water is up to grade, to make sure those pesticides don't degrade, and you get the best return on your investment to make sure that product still works. And then anti-foam also falls into that category. We're going to talk just about a few of these today, but we're gonna dive right into it, right? So why do we need different adjuvants? What's the difference? Well, some are for coverage, wetting on the leaf. We mentioned that we talked about it earlier, where maybe adding certain fungicide, you might want to have a little NIS in there, that wetter spreader sticker, to kind of help broaden the coverage. Get, some of these aren't quite very systemic. So if you have better coverage, it'll help get the product in there. And when we talk about wetting, it's about keeping the droplets wetter a little bit longer. If we can keep the droplets coming out of the sprayer a little wetter longer, that gives a chance for the plant to take uptake and get that product into the plant. MSOs, or methylated seed oils, those are for penetration of the tissues, right? When throughout the season, as the weeds kind of during stressful situation, they can harden off. They can create quite a strong barrier, whether it be hairs on the leaf or a wax tissue on the leaf. Oils help kind of melt that surface so the active can get into the plant. Same thing with TOCs, very similar, maybe a little older technologies. Water conditioners, whether you're changing the pH or you're adding a product to tie in the cations, will help with improved performance. Drift and deposition, we're going to get into that a little bit. Reduce off-target movement, right? You guys are putting some money into the tank. We don't want it to blow away. We're trying to get as much as that AI onto the target for reduced loss. So surfactants, right? That's kind of the easy one. When we think adjuvants, we often think surfactant, that non-ionic surfactant, quite common in the marketplace. What do? Well, they lower the surface tension between a liquid and the solid surface they land on, right? Water tends to beat up, but if we can add an adjuvant in there to help spread the droplet so it'll stick better, reduce that tension a little bit so we can keep that active on the leaf so it can get absorbed. Approved adhesion, right? More spreading and sticking when you take that pressure off of the droplets so they stick a bit better. Keeping the leaf surface moist, humectant, very important for a lot of products. If it's hot and dry and the products do get to the target, land on that leaf, if they dry too quickly, well, there's no absorption of that active to get into the plant. So sometimes adding a non-ionic surfactant will help do that, right? Just a visual on what that non-ionic surfactant can do. Your water beading, that's quite common. Kind of like when you wax your truck, it kind of beads up and rolls off. Well, a lot of products can do that in the tank on you, and when it hits the leaf, will roll off. Adding that surfactant will spread the droplet out, give it a chance to stick a bit better. Right, here's just another visual. Those droplets, there's a hairy surface there. It's not getting absorbed. It's stuck in the hairs of that protective barrier of the weed, and then it's just evaporating. So that's just little things like that when we want to get that product onto the leaf. However, those many weeds have that protective layer, and it's a struggle to get those droplets in there. But when we add that NIS, boom, it'll come crashing in. Its surface tension has been broken, and it can get into right down onto that cuticle of the leaf to make sure that it is getting the product onto the leaf, right? So with Winfield United, we do have high activate. There are others non-ionic surfactants on the market, and I'm sure Lakeside are giving you the best one that they can for that job. So just putting it out there that Winfield does have its own high activate. Oils, so a little bit different than non-ionic surfactants, somewhat similar. It does improve adhesion and absorption of the pesticide. It dissolves that waxy cuticle, like I mentioned before, right? Sometimes that barrier is thick and waxy, and we need an oil to kind of melt it a little bit to kind of break in to get in there. It keeps the leaf surface moist also, right? Just like oil, engine oil or any kind of an oil, they don't dry as quickly as water. So it has that humectancy factor help penetrate and get that herbicide uptake. They are generally more effective than an NIS during low humidity and drought stress environments, or if your weeds are getting a little bit larger. NIS does help with the humectant and breaking some of those barriers, but as the weeds get bigger and the conditions get tougher, we saw in 2020, it got hot, it got dry, things were the defense mechanisms of those weeds really kind of hardened off, and it was a little more difficult for weed control. And sometimes we needed to up the ante on the adjuvant to kind of make sure the product worked the first time. Just a quick visual, your droplet on top, without that adjuvant, it's just kind of seeping in a little bit. But when you add that oil adjuvant, it's spreading, it's breaking the barriers to get that active into the plant. So there's kind of 2 different types of oils, maybe 3. There's your traditional crop oil concentrate. Back in the day when you sprayed atrazine, right, you're adding a crop concentrate often. It was just a blend of paraffinic oil and emulsifier. When we talk about emulsifiers and an oil, right, we're adding an oil to your tank of water. We all know that oil and water don't mix very well. So they have an emulsifier in there to kind of help bridge that gap to make the oil and water mix well together. So the traditional ones would be 80% oil with about a 20% load of emulsifier, where the high surfactant and a good common crop oil on the market would be Assist. If you've heard of that, that would be your traditional crop oil concentrate. And the high surfactant crop oil concentrate would be a blend also similar to your traditional one, but it would have a less load of oil. Rather than 80, it'd be about half, 50% paraffinic oil and 25 to 50% emulsifier, just a little more surfactant mixed with that oil to make it a little more common. So Merge and Carrier are those 2 that are quite common in the marketplace as a high surfactant crop oil concentrate. So another type of oil adjuvant is the methylated seed oil, more of a newer technology compared to the traditional crop oil concentrates. They also have a blend of methylated seed oil and emulsifier, same type of deal, 80% with the 20% emulsifier in there. Destination is Winfield United's MSO, or methylated seed oil. We just brought it to the market late last summer, had great success with it. It's formulated to mix with all the chemicals that are on the market and that you're using. So if you see Lakeside given your jugs of Winfield Destination, you know that that's a high quality MSO on the market. Another one would be MSO concentrate. That's another competitor that's out there that exists. So kind of like the crop oil concentrate had your 80-20 mix, and then they had their high surfactant oil concentrates. The methylated seed oils kind of has the same deal. Contains that blend of seed oil and emulsifier, 50-50 mix, give or take, with a surfactant. And we've just launched Journey HSOC, which is stands for the high surfactant oil concentrate. We just kept bringing that out this year. So we're going to have that 1-2 punch if you're need an oil adjuvant. We're going to have Destination MSO and Journey HSOC, depending on what adjuvant you need for an oil. We've got them both. So just a quick rundown of, okay, we just talked about MSO, COC, HSOC. What are the real differences? Well, we're going to break that down, COC, MSO. COCs tend to be a blend of petroleum oils and emulsifiers, older technology, so kind of pretty close to kind of diesel almost, those old oils that they mixed in there. It was the original oil when they realized that adding some of these oils to certain products were required. Common brand, we mentioned Assist before, and then MSO, vegetable oil and emulsifiers, it could be made out of several different vegetable oils. Common is soybean, there's sunflower, even canola and peanut oil. All of those are on the marketplace. When it comes to Destination, we are using soybean oils, so we are supporting our soybean farmers. So just to kind of break it down, so that older technology has improved when they came out with the methylated seed oil approach, And really what the difference is, it's reacting a little bit faster, right? The petroleum oil, the older technology, before it got totally dissolved, it took over 24 hours to kind of break down that barrier to get absorption, where the MSO, it took 20 hours, several hours earlier. So it had a better chance to break the barrier, get absorbed. You know, in that 4 hour time frame, you're going to have more drying effect and less absorption into the plant. So it's good to add an MSO over a COC. It's the newer technology. It's going to just get more of that product into the plant. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, we're talking about Winfield United's Marshall. That's a Group 1 Quizalfop. So let's use you're trying to control volunteer corn in your soybean. You're going to go in there with a Group 1, and it can work with an NIS, it can work with an MSO, or it can work with an HSOC. So how do I know which one do I need? Well, it definitely depends. Isn't that great that it's a moving target about how much adjuvant we need to use and the rate, right? So if the conditions are good, you know, it's earlier in the spring, you're going to get that volunteer corn small. It's not really hot out. It's, you know, not over 25 degrees. Relative humidity is decent. It's not super dry out. You can get away with a non-ionic surfactant, right? But as the conditions get a little more difficult, we're getting hotter, we're over 30 degrees, it's dry, everything's hardening up, and over time that weed control pressure increases. We're maybe getting past label to try to control some of these weeds. Well, you could combat that and get better control by just going up the ladder on using an adjuvant to make sure we're getting the best control the first time. So here's a bit of a cheat sheet. We're going to send this is like a postcard form. I'm going to send this to Lakeside when we get them, to kind of give you an idea on maybe picking the right adjuvant for your situation. So as I mentioned, volunteer corn, maybe we were a little late, but 2020 was a great example of how the right adjuvant could work. We got several inquiries when it came to destination last summer. Got a lot of accounts asking, by geez, I was struggling to control certain weeds or volunteer corn in my field. And they kind of maybe blamed that wasn't a very good adjuvant in that pack. But maybe it's about what adjuvant was in the tank, and perhaps to a certain degree how much you used. So let's just kind of use a scorecard to figure that out. So last summer, I remember waking up in the morning in July, and it was barely 40 degrees humidity out at 7 in the morning. It was really low humidity. So we're going to give that a score of 3. The temp was over 30. We were spraying midday, right, to control some of these weeds. Tough time when it was so hot out. It was a droughty situation. We're going to give that a score of 2. We were maybe just past the label, right? 4 inches is generally a general rule of thumb for weed size on a lot of these labels. So when you're crop scouting and they're getting a little longer, you know, you're maybe just past label. We're not adding to the fertilizer to this tank. So we're going to add this up, right? 6, 8, 10, 11. So 11 would give you a score. You should, rather than high activate, you should probably use destination or journey to make sure that we're getting good control at that time. So this is just a bit of a cheat sheet. You can, depending on the weather condition that is happening when you decide to go out to do that spray application, this will give you a good idea, right? So destination, newly on the market. It's a great MSO, improves the absorption of pesticides into the plant surfaces. It helps dissolve those waxy substances on the leaf, as I mentioned before. And a big one is improved humectancy. So if you did see a jug of destination last summer, we had the color scheme on it was different than what you see on the picture there. It was maybe a little close to our high activate, and there may be some confusion there. So you'll see on the bottom, we did change the color, but it's the same product. Journey just launched. I'm really excited about Journey. This is going to be your Cadillac of adjuvants. It took a little time to come to market, but it's gonna be a proprietary adjuvant to Winfield. The big thing is it's a methylated seed oil plus, so it's destination plus Maxin technology. And if you saw on Dave's presentation earlier, I did see a slide there with Maxin manganese in there. And our plant nutrition products, or our foliar fertilizers, also have Maxin technology in that. And that's a proprietary blend that's to Winfield United to help give it another level of boost. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it's a great technology. So it also, just like a Destination, dissolves those waxy substances on the leaf surface to help penetrate the leaf. Again, helps with humectancy, and it also helps with drop root coverage and spread like that. It's got that surfactant in there, unlike Destination, to kind of help with the sticking and absorption into the leaf. So Maxin technology, you ask, right? So the components of Maxin technology isn't too complicated. It's high fructose corn syrup, or a blend of it, and it acts as another humectant to keep the surface wetter longer to allow more time for uptake. So it's just a different formulation of a surfactant to help with sticking and absorption. And when you think high fructose corn syrup, we like to kind of compare it to your pop or soft drink if you're like me in Eastern Ontario. And what happens when you knock over that can of Pepsi when you're having a couple of ryes at night and you leave it on the table? It gets kind of sticky. It doesn't quite, run off the table if you leave it there. So it kind of does the same thing to the leaf. It's going to stick to the leaf a little bit better. It attracts and absorbs a little bit of moisture to help with that humectancy, and we'll just keep that product on the leaf a little bit better. And these and the APGs, the alkylopolyglucosides, that kind of helps inside the leaf. So you've got that product to help stick, break the barriers, and get into the leaf. And then those APGs will help pull it through to kind of get into the plant to have better efficiency of the product. So it's a great technology. It's been out for a few years now in the US, and we got it coming in Canada. So we talked about the activator adjuvants, right? The surfactants and the oils. Now we're going to touch on a couple of utility modifiers really quick. And I'm going to start with a water conditioner. Water is one of your most important tools when you spray, right? Water is your friend. And there's several things that can happen with the water in your spray tank, mainly antagonism due to the cations into the water. So if you have hard water with calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, some salts in there, all those cations will bind to certain herbicides and pesticides. Some are dependent. We'll use glyphosate as an example, quite common herbicide, right? It's a weak acid and can bind to those cations in the water very quickly and can become less effective with your spray application. So adding a water conditioner can kind of help overcome some of that antagonism and keep the herbicide doing what it's got to do. So what's happening with those cations, right? So on this photo right here, right, we got two glyphosate molecules, and they got stuck onto a calcium molecule. So that cation's in there. It's binding to two glyphosate molecules. Gosh darn it, this molecule now is calcium glyphosate, is not plant available, does not get into the plant, and is ineffective. So if you have a lot of cations and you're floating around in your water, over time, they will bind to that in the water. And by adding an AMS water conditioner, very simple product, it'll bind to those cations. It'll be mainly the sulfite in there that's going to bind to the cations, keep them separate, and giving a chance for the ammonium, which is a very plant available product, to bind to the calcium and bring it in. So it kind of has two effects too. So that's in the tank. Now that we're keeping the cations separate, we've got the glyphosate molecule ready to go to get into the plant. Right? What else does it do? It also helps coming out of the nozzle just a little bit, right? So when we talk about the antagonism on the leaf surface, often it's on the dust. The last 3 years, the comments I get about, gosh darn it, how do I prevent dust or spray tracks behind the sprayer? As there's turbulence behind the sprayer, dust kind of comes up. As you spray glyphosate and it touches any of that dust, it's binding to that and is ineffective, and we have reduced weed control. Well, adding an ammonium sulfate water conditioner can help with that, and mainly the ammonium, as it's going to help break down some of those barriers to kind of get in there, right? Very weed specific. when we want to see, when we got problems with velvet leaf, lamb's quarters, those guys they have a strong barrier defense mechanism on the leaf to keep things from coming in. An AMS water conditioner really helps with those types of weeds to get in there. So ammonium sulfate is ammonium sulfate, especially used as a water conditioner. Crimson NG is the Winfield United's water conditioner. And you're going to see that Crimson NG is going to work a little bit quicker than ammonium sulfate on its own. Day 5, this velvet leaf is done breathing. It's dying off. Or day 6, day 7, it's still breathing a little bit. Control is going to happen, but it took a little longer. And that's the benefit to Crimson NG. We just talked about Maxin technology. Well, we might have taken that technology and added it to our water conditioner to kind of give it a bit of a boost. Not only are we conditioning our water, we've added a little bit extra in there to kind of help pull those products through the plant. I think this is an important factor when it comes to stewardship with glyphosate. I talked to my American colleagues, and boy, oh boy, it's a struggle with weed control and glyphosate now. When it comes to the label on glyphosate or Roundup in the US, AMS is on the label. They recommend you adding a water conditioner to that tank. We're not there yet in Canada, but I think we should be adding a water conditioner such as Crimson NG to kind of help protect that glyphosate molecule, make it work the way it's supposed to work. And glyphosate still works pretty good for us in Ontario. And if we can help maintain the properties of glyphosate, I think we can protect that technology, that glyphosate technology that we rely on so much. So I really hope that you guys can use some Crimson on your farm and protect that technology. Not only that, if we can get the weeds to drop a little bit quicker, gosh darn it, and your critical weed free period is 0 to 8 leaf. Say, if you can knock off those weeds a little quicker, why can't we get a couple of more bushels too, right? So Crimson Adjuvant is convenient liquid, easy to use. So it's a water conditioner. You add it into the tank first, get as much water in there as you can, and agitate for a bit of time. Let that Crimson tie up those cations that are floating around in there, right? Give it time to do its job. It'll help with several other herbicides. When you got Crimson in the tank, it'll help everybody. If you got a large mix going on there, it can help to make everybody play nice. It's relatively pH neutral. Some products you have to be careful with changing the pH. Some products don't necessarily play nice with other products if you've changed your pH. So with Crimson, you don't have to worry about that too much. We threw in an antifoam also in there just for convenience. It's not the be all and end all to reduce foam, but it is added first to the tank, so that it'll kind of help if foam gets away on you. We have in there for added convenience. So we've controlled the water in our tank. We got great water coming out, and now that it's coming out of the nozzle, well, what else? What other adjuvant can we add to the tank to tighten that right up? We do have interlock. This is a big one for us also. It's our flagship brand. As you can see, herbicide alone. That fog that's kind of getting away on there, those are driftable fines that out of an XR nozzle, you're going to lose regardless of wind, regardless of what you can do. There's going to be a certain percentage of driftable fines that we can't control well on its own. But by adding interlock, we can reduce those fines significantly without having any issues with pattern collapse or change in the droplet spectrum. Interlock will maintain that and actually make it better. So adding interlock to the tank will help. I also should have mentioned early, Winfield United has done a lot of research into adjuvants. We have our innovation center down in Wisconsin. We have 2 wind tunnels now where we test nozzles, how they react. We are one of the few that can add actives into the wind tunnel to see how chemistry changes when you are adding your pesticides to the tank. Sometimes water alone coming out of a nozzle, and after you've added a chemical can change. So we test all that. So through our wind tunnel, we've tested every nozzle on the market, and the dark green is the nozzle with Roundup in the tank. That T-Jet XR, that video I just showed, there's 17% or more that are coming out of that nozzle that are driftable fines that don't have a chance to get to that target. And by adding an interlock, we've reduced it significantly. And pick a coarser nozzle, like a very coarse TZAI. Yeah, a larger droplet, less driftable fines, but we've reduced it again. We're going to get better results by adding interlock. Doesn't matter the nozzle on the market. Interlock will pretty much reduce fines by half. Great stuff. Easy to use. It's 100 mils an acre is kind of the given rate, as long as you don't go over 20 gallons to the acre. If you're over 20, you might want to add 20 or 30 mils more. But the big thing with interlock and why it's on so many acres, it's on 75 million acres annually between North America and the world. So, and increasing. So it's on several acres. And the reason for that is so it'll reduce drift up to 70%, depending on your nozzle, improves deposition. So this is the key to interlock. So we're reducing the drift. We're going to take some of those fines. We're going to make a droplet that's useful. Every nozzle has a spectrum of droplets coming out of it. Some are a little bigger, some are a little smaller. And we're going to tighten that span. We're going to have more of an even distribution of droplet sizes coming out of that nozzle with interlock. And with that, we see better deposition, more coverage. You're going to get more to where it needs to be. And when we have a better, more uniform droplet coming out of that nozzle, we're seeing canopy depth too. So we're going to get some product in, down, in, below. We're going to kind of penetrate that canopy a little bit. So when it comes to, let's say, white mold control in soybeans, where does that start? Well, it starts kind of down and in there. So if we can get some product down in there, we're going to have a better efficiency of our products. So it's one of the reasons why interlock works so well compared to some of the competitors. But unfortunately, there's always an asterisk, right? I mentioned that it works with every single nozzle on the market. It works with every product on the market. That's why it's on 75 million acres annually. Tank compatible with everybody, 100 mils, you add it in last, no problems. So let's just talk about the Extend technology. So we have to use extremely coarse, ultra coarse nozzles, right? You have to have your boom height, your ground speed. But I mentioned how Crimson is an ammonium sulfate based water conditioner. That's a big no-no when using the Extend technology. So if you do choose to condition your water, that's great, but do make sure that your tank is clean and that you aren't adding any Crimson to the tank with the Extend technology. So that's the watch out with Crimson, which is also tank compatible with products. And that ultra coarse nozzle, just to reiterate on that a little bit, right? It makes very big droplets, significantly large droplets to reduce fines. However, just quick, it will provide less leaf surface coverage. Larger your droplet, the less coverage you're going to have. So that's something to remember. And it can also increase the risk of bounce. And when it came to that nozzle, the ultra coarse nozzle, we found interlock didn't quite do what we would like it to do. Cuts drift in half, over half, all nozzles. This one, it does work, but not the way we'd like it to use, especially when it comes to dicamba, correct? So if you're using this nozzle, we're gonna use a different adjuvant to reduce those fines, improve canopy depth, and get better coverage for ultimately the stronger weed management that we need. So we did have to come up with dialed in. It's formulated just for the ultra coarse nozzle. So this isn't a adjuvant necessarily for Extend technology. If you haven't changed your nozzles and you're maybe using a very coarse nozzles or something else, that's okay. You didn't hear it from me, but if you didn't change your nozzles, you use interlock. However, the label recommendation is to use the ultra coarse nozzles. Please use dialed in. That'll reduce your drift and get that canopy penetration. And we've also thrown in that anti-foam in there just for some convenience. Just to give you a quick video, right, there's still some driftable fines that are heading up on that nozzle. Every nozzle has driftable fines. They got, yes, the average droplet size is very coarse, but there's still a percentage of driftable fines coming out of there. And by adding dialed into the tank, we're tightening that up. We're keeping that together a little bit longer before it can break apart to get coverage. We're going to try to get a uniform droplet so we get great coverage with that TTI. So this would be the flip side of that other card that I talked about. We're going to focus on the bottom half, right? Does it require an adjuvant? Let's say no. We're going to look at the some of the water conditioners or drift deposition aid. Yeah, do you need? And you know, this is where, are you spraying dicamba for beans? No. You can use Crimson if you are spraying dicamba. You do not use a water conditioner. But are you using a TTI? No. You use interlock? Yes, you use dialed in. It's simple as that. That's kind of the quick and dirty on that. So this card, we're gonna send that to Lakeside if for you and your growers, if you'd like to kind of have that sheet, we're gonna get to you. So I'm not sure how I did on time, but I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. I think Caitlin has answered Ryan's question in the chat.
Awesome.
I think you might have answered some of these questions already, but when adding adjuvant to improve absorption, does crop safety decrease also?
Yeah, great question. That is quite common. You know, as we are trying to break down those barriers on the leaf surface, unfortunately, you're breaking down the leaf surface a little bit on your crop. And this is where it's kind of important to understand these adjuvants and the rates and the time and the time of day and how the conditions are. If we don't need to cook it with Journey, maybe an NIS would be fine, and you'll get great weed control without kind of burning your crop. So that's kind of where I was going with that. So yeah, you do have to be careful with crop safety as you use some of these adjuvants.
All right, another question. If you're at the bottom end of water volumes, does surfactant help offset that?
When you mean bottom end of water volume, like gallons per acre, is that? Maybe repeat that.
Yep, again. Let's see. He said yes, or she said yes.
So if you're on a low gallons per acre, do you need an adjuvant? What was the question?
Sorry, I'm just scrolling. If you're at the bottom end of water volumes, does surfactant help offset that? And I'm guessing in gallons, yeah, like say 10 or less, or.
Well, yeah, you're gonna still need it, because as you change gallons, as you increase gallonage, you're gonna increase coverage. But adding these adjuvants, you know, increasing coverage is great. However, you still need to get through the barriers on the leaf, and that's a big part of adding the adjuvants. Is once they get to where they're supposed to be, you need to kind of get into the plant, and that's where a lot of the adjuvants will really help out. So I would continue to add them for sure.
All right. I think some people, I think Matt and Caitlin answered other questions.
Awesome.
I think that's it for you, Darren.
Perfect.
So next up,
Nicole, there's a question there about manganese on max in manganese with glyphosate that just popped up.
Great question. So we're buds with a lot of the manufacturers out there, and when it came to our nutrition portfolio, mainly the Maxins, we made darn sure that they were tank compatible with glyphosate. Glyphosate is in a lot of these passes, and they we're on the US side. They do support us with our Maxin lineup, whether it be manganese. We have a zinc manganese boron mix, also, or a boron on its own that is safe with glyphosate for sure.